Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. Brian Welker couldn't help but smile as he wiped the sweat from his brow. Earlier in the day he had been promoted to shift foreman at Harding Containers, effective immediately. The icing on the cake was working the night shift for the foreseeable future. Most people hated the night shift, but the timing was great for Brian. His son was a junior in high school and participated in several sports and clubs. By working nights, Brian would be able to attend his son's activities without missing work. Brian had worked the night shift more than a few times over the years and had developed a system for sleeping during the day that made it work for him. That was the reason he was crawling across roof trusses in his attic on a warm August afternoon. He had been given Thursday and Friday off with pay after being informed of the promotion. It was an opportunity to rest and prepare for his new position starting on Sunday night. Brian had long planned to create a small apartment over his detached garage. It would become his refuge where he could peacefully sleep during the day and avoid the usual interruptions. Brian was running a cable to provide internet in his new apartment. The Wi-Fi signal in the house simply did not reach the apartment, so he decided to place an extender in the end of his house attic nearest his garage, hoping it would give a strong signal inside his apartment. As he worked, Brian heard faint sounds coming from inside his house. It was early afternoon, so his wife Brenda would be at work, and their son Tim was visiting Brenda's parents for a few days. The house should have been empty. Brian crawled over the trusses toward the area from which the noises were coming. After moving closer, he determined the sounds were coming from his bedroom. Conversation became clearer as Brian settled over an unused air conditioning vent in his bedroom ceiling. Brenda had insisted the old vent was blowing cold air on her at night, causing her frequent neck aches. He had installed a new vent as far from Brenda's side of the bed as possible, but never bothered to remove the old one, which would have required repairing the hole in the ceiling. Brian gently lifted the insulation resting on the attic floor and uncovered the vent. He felt a pang in his gut when he saw Brenda with another man. Despite the painful scene, Brian was unable to look away. He set his phone to video and carefully placed it on the vent, ensuring the camera had an unobstructed view of the bed. "I love how close we are," the man said quietly. "Does your husband ever connect with you like this, or does he have a different way of showing affection?" "I've asked you not to mention Brian," Brenda protested softly. "This isn't about him. He's a good partner and a great father." "I'm about to finish," the man continued. "And yet you say you're happy with him. Doesn't something feel off about that?" "I don't know why I agreed to do this here," Brenda said. "There's no risk of being caught in your apartment. This is just so intense," she sighed. The man pulled back slightly. "Do you see how thrilling it is when you take risks? Being together in my place is one thing, but doing this in your own home takes it to another level." Brian recognized the man as Bill Grant, a driver for the parcel delivery company where both he and Brenda worked. Bill was recently divorced and had a daughter in Tim's class. "That sounds terrible," Brenda responded without much emotion. "You wanted to have sex in my bed because it turns you on to think you've outdone Brian. You act like it's a competition or something." "It is a competition, at least for men," replied Bill with a soft chuckle. "You're a sexy woman and the sex is great, but knowing you're married and I'm with you in your husband's bed makes me feel like a winner." "It feels incredible," Grant said. "It wouldn't be as satisfying if Brian caught us here. I don't know why I agreed to this, but it won't happen again. I'm worried about Brian discovering us." "It would ruin my marriage," admitted Brenda. "Let's make a deal," suggested Grant. "As long as you keep your husband out of the picture, I won't insist we do it in his bed. Once he's out of the way, we can continue our arrangement. I'll be back to reclaim my place as your lover." "I'm not going to refuse Brian," Brenda said. "He's my husband. I can't just shut him out and expect everything to go smoothly." "Brian's a man and wants sex regularly," Grant replied. "You do what you have to do, but remember, I'll be with you in this very bed as soon as possible. If you keep him satisfied, it might be exciting for you too." "Look, I'll try to discourage Brian from getting intimate and keep our meetings in my bedroom to a minimum," Brenda said. "I don't want to think about what would happen if Brian ever caught us." Brian had parked his inside the detached garage hidden from view. Brenda had no idea he was home and certainly didn't know he was listening to her conversation. His face was covered in sweat, dripping steadily onto the insulation below. He forced himself to stay still, resisting the urge to vomit as he listened to the couple get dressed and leave. As Brian made his way to the ladder, he considered what he had just learned. He had discovered his wife's betrayal and realized that she was planning to keep their intimate life minimal to please her lover. Brian managed a grim smile, thinking that Brenda would have no trouble withholding intimacy from him because she would no longer be sharing that part of her life with him. He resolved to focus on his son Tim, who had 2 years of high school left. Brian decided to put his efforts into making his new apartment functional and comfortable, turning it into his living space for the next year and a half. He would need a small kitchen and a full bathroom by the time Tim graduated and went to college. Brian contacted contractors to get estimates, deciding to hire a company to complete the work quickly and professionally. He realized that his time was more valuable than saving money by doing the work himself. His promotion would easily cover the expenses. Brian's perspective had shifted significantly. He was no longer invested in his old way of life and was determined to make sure Tim's college education was fully funded. Beyond that, he planned to rebuild his life and enjoy it. By the time Brenda walked in after work, Brian had gained control of his emotions. "Did you get off early?" Brenda asked, noticing Brian sitting in the kitchen. Brian looked at Brenda and saw her differently. She had some lines and carried a few extra pounds. Had his feelings for her blinded him to her faults? He was saddened by his sudden change in attitude, but recognized it was her choice to have an affair, and he was simply reacting. "Yeah, I'm working nights for a while, starting tonight," Brian explained. "They let me come home to pack a lunch and rest before I head back. It's a bit of a jam at work." "They shouldn't ask you to work nights after a day shift," Brenda said. "At least lie down and sleep for a few hours." "Good idea," Brian responded. "I'll just go to the guest room and wait." Brenda, recalling the condition of their bed, insisted, "I just remembered I need to wash the bed linens." "Okay," Brian said calmly, chuckling to himself at Brenda's discomfort. "I'll use the bed in the guest room. There's no need to get so excited." A few hours later, Brian left the house as if he was going to work. He stopped at a local sports bar, watched a baseball game, and enjoyed a few beers. He had previously set up an air mattress in his future apartment. Once he was sure Brenda would be asleep, he parked inside the garage and went up the stairs to his air mattress. He slept surprisingly well. One of the contractors Brian interviewed the next day was between projects and offered a very good price if Brian agreed to start immediately. The contractor's crew would be moving to a new development in 2 weeks. Brian agreed and signed the contract for work to begin Monday morning. His night shift operated from Sunday night through Thursday night. The plant would shut down Friday evening and start up again Sunday night. Brenda knew Brian wouldn't have to work Friday night, so she was surprised when he got ready for bed and headed for the guest room that night. "Why are you going to sleep in the guest room?" Brenda asked, perplexed. "We won't see much of each other while you're on night shift, so why don't you sleep in her bed?" "Since I worked nights last night and slept a few hours this morning while you were at work, I'm not very tired. I plan to watch a baseball game and maybe a movie afterward," Brian explained. "I'm trying to get used to staying awake at night and sleeping during the day. I don't want to disrupt your sleep unless you're thinking we should do something else." Brenda's reaction was just as Brian had expected. If he hadn't overheard her conversation with her, he might have missed her brief, startled look before she gave a weak smile. "I'm pretty tired tonight. Maybe we could just cuddle a little and then go to sleep," Brenda suggested. "Besides, Tim's home tonight. He might hear us." "Cuddling won't work for me," Brian said. "I want to be close and feel connected. If that's not going to happen, I'll just sleep in the guest room." "I understand, but I'm really tired and just not in the mood," Brenda said, trying to explain. "I hope you understand." "I understand better than you realize," Brian replied. "Let me know if you feel like getting together later." "Good night," he added, turning toward the guest room, leaving Brenda with a confused expression. On Saturday, Brian played catch with Tim for an hour and then did some yard work. When bedtime came, he walked down the hall to the guest bedroom. Brenda watched him with concern, wondering about his behavior. Brian went into work early Sunday night to prepare for his role as shift foreman. By the time the production workers arrived, he felt confident in his new position. He hadn't told Brenda about his promotion as she had kept secrets from him, so he no longer felt obligated to share everything. His shift went smoothly and he was well received by his team. The new position brought more responsibility, but Brian was familiar with the issues and knew how to handle them. He settled into his role with minimal difficulty. Brenda had already left for work when the construction crew began setting up. Brian spoke briefly with the job foreman to ensure everything was on track, and then went inside. He fell asleep immediately but was woken several times by the loud noises from the crew, and once by the phone ringing. Annoyed for not turning off the ringer, he answered groggily. "I'm sorry, Brian. Did I wake you up?" Beverly, his mother-in-law, asked. "Is that why you called?" Brian replied with some irritation. "There's no need to get upset," Beverly said. "I just wanted to let you know that, Bill, and I heard you were on night shift and won't disturb you. If you need us to do anything for Tim while you're sleeping, just let us know." Brian hung up the phone without a response and unplugged it from the wall. He shook his head at the thoughtlessness of others. It took a few minutes, but he eventually fell back asleep. The construction crew completed their work in less than a week. Brian was amazed at how quickly the contractor finished the remodeling. He would have taken months to do it himself. When he woke up Friday afternoon, he drove to a furniture store and ordered a king-sized bed, a small kitchen table for chairs, and a small sofa. Then he went to a major appliance dealer and selected a large flat-screen TV, a refrigerator, an oven, and a microwave. By Monday afternoon, Brian's bachelor pad, as he considered it, would be ready for him to occupy full-time. He chuckled at how perplexed Brenda had been when she came home from work Monday to find a crew of men bustling around the detached garage. She approached Brian as he was chatting with the job foreman and insisted on a private discussion to understand what was going on. "I'm having an apartment finished over the garage," Brian revealed. "I want a place where I can sleep during the day without interruptions or phone calls. It's being double insulated to keep the noise to a minimum, and I won't have a landline there. Since I'll be working nights for some time, it seemed like a good idea to have a space where I can rest without disrupting you and Tim. You won't even know I'm around," Brian continued. "I'll be at Tim's baseball practices and games and we'll have dinner together. Don't worry about that." Brenda looked concerned. "You mentioned a few days ago that I should let you know when I'm in the mood for something special, but I haven't taken you up on it. Are you asking for something tonight?" Brian responded, "Marriage isn't just about physical intimacy. It involves conversations, sharing ideas, and addressing issues together. If you're not in the mood, I can respect that, but I need to know when you're interested. This arrangement will work fine as long as you communicate with me." Brenda retorted, "I expect more from my husband than just physical satisfaction. I want a sincere apology and a nice evening out at a good restaurant as part of that apology." Brian broke into a big smile and walked away, leaving Brenda confused. He was making it easier to keep Bill Grant from demanding more from her, but Brenda was troubled by Brian's change in behavior. He had always been attentive, and his current distance concerned her. Brian had fully moved into his new apartment by the following Wednesday. The coming weekend promised 3 nights off due to Labor Day, and Tim's junior year would start the following Tuesday. "How would you two like to go to a Diamondbacks game this weekend?" Brian asked at dinner on Thursday. "They're playing the Dodgers and it should be a great series." "That would be amazing," Tim exclaimed. "I'm not really into baseball," Brenda said. "I'll pass on that offer and find something to do around the house." Brian responded under his breath, but loud enough for Brenda to hear. "It's settled then. Tim and I will go to the Saturday night game." Tim was excited. "I can't wait to tell Scooter about this. He's a big Dodger fan and used to live in Los Angeles. Why don't you invite him along?" Brian suggested. "Baseball is more fun with friends, especially those who are fans." Tim raced off to call Scooter, and soon returned with good news. "Scooter's mom said he can go." Brian observed. "Baseball is a great way to bond with the boys." Brenda replied. "Scooter is a nice, polite young man. His real name is Horace." Brian shook his head and joked, "Horace? No wonder he has a nickname. What kind of parent names their child Horace?" Brenda continued, "Horace's father passed away 2 years ago. He and his mother moved here this summer to be closer to her parents, who are in poor health." Brian chuckled. "I'll just stick with calling him Scooter." Saturday afternoon, Tim pulled his truck into the driveway of a nice ranch house. Before he could stop, Scooter was racing out the door and jumped into the truck. "Mr. Welker, Mom wants to meet you before we leave. I guess she wants to make sure you're not a serial killer or something." "No problem," Brian said as he climbed out of the truck and walked to the house. He rang the bell and a slender, rather nondescript woman around Brian's age opened the door. With what he felt was a quick glance, Brian determined her legs were her best feature. They were strong and well-shaped. Her running shorts provided a clear view of them, while her stomach was flat and her top hugged her torso closely. "My legs look pretty good compared to the rest of me, don't you think?" asked Scooter's mom. To Brian's chagrin, he hesitated before responding. Well yeah, agreed Brian once he saw the grin on the woman's face. "You've got a great pair of legs. Do you think I should let my son go to a baseball game with a man who checks out every woman he sees?" challenged the boy's mother. "I'm trying to raise a gentleman." Brian saw the laughter in the woman's eyes and knew instinctively she was teasing him a bit. He decided to play along. "What you're really asking is should you let your son go anywhere with a man who appreciates women, which is a part of being a man," replied Brian with a grin. "He needs to learn how to appreciate fair sex. I'll show him what to look for and how to do it. I certainly hope you'll be less obvious during these life lessons you'll be giving Horace," countered the still smiling woman. "The first thing I'll teach him is to respond to anyone who calls him Horace with a smile, except his mom of course," joked Brian. "I see my son will learn to be polite and appreciate women's attributes," said Gertrude. "Not even close," responded Brian. "I'll show him the fine art of appreciating people in a respectful way. It's important he has a well-rounded perspective and not focus entirely on any single trait." "That's a relief," replied Scooter's mom, gaining even more respect from Brian. "Have a good time and be sure Scooter calls if you're going to be late. My name's Gertrude, by the way." "Seriously, Gertrude, what do your friends call you?" asked Brian. "Oh, for my male friends I'm called Minx, Raven, Candy, or Bubbles. My girlfriends call me Gertrude," replied the straight-faced woman. "Sounds good to me. I'm Brian. We're going to be friends, so I'll call you Minx. I kind of like that name." "Why am I not surprised?" responded Gertrude, breaking into a hearty laugh. "Horace can go along with you anytime. I love your sense of humor. Tim is a very polite young man, so I was pretty sure his parents would be fine. Thanks for inviting him to the game. We're a baseball family. I used to go to as many Dodgers home games as I could. My father even played in the minor leagues before I was born. He was pretty good, just not quite good enough. Scooter's a great kid, so it's no problem. I'll keep an eye on him and make sure he gets back home in one piece, Minx. Have a nice day." "Is that going to stick?" "I was making a joke," protested Gertrude. "You'll always be a minx to me," was Brian's quick reply as he turned and headed back to the truck. Brian had a relaxing day at the game. Scooter managed to catch a foul ball. Both boys ate too many hot dogs and drank too much soda. They fell asleep in the back seat of the truck before Brian was able to exit the parking lot. When he reached Scooter's home, Brian gently shook the boy awake and escorted the sleepy teen to his front door where he was met by a beaming Gertrude. "He may have had too many hot dogs and sodas," admitted Brian. "Of course he did. He was at a ball game," replied Gertrude. "Thanks so much for taking him and bringing him back safely." "It was my pleasure." "Scooter's a great kid," Brian retorted. "I'll see you at the next game." Brian settled into a routine that worked well for him. He would get home, have a small breakfast and then sleep from 9 to 3 o'clock. With the extra soundproofing and blackout curtains on his windows, he usually slept soundly. Brenda occasionally complained about him always sleeping in his man cave, even on weekends, but she left the subject alone as soon as Brian asked if she needed his help. He decided she was truly worried about Grant insisting on intimacy in her bedroom and being caught, which suited Brian fine. It indicated she wasn't contemplating asking for a divorce at the moment. His goal of remaining married until Tim graduated high school seemed attainable. Because he was getting less exercise as a foreman, Brian purchased a home gym machine that was advertised to provide a complete body workout. To his pleasant surprise, it worked as advertised as long as he was diligent in using it. He attended all of Tim's baseball practices, and soon the coach had him working with a few kids off to the side while the coach worked with a different group of players. Tim was a pretty good player and showed signs of improvement, but Scooter was a real surprise to Brian. At the start of the season, Scooter showed some talent but was tentative and timid. Brian worked with him as much as he could, even spending a few hours on weekends practicing at the local park. Since he wasn't having sex, Brian took the opportunity to play baseball with the boys. As Scooter's confidence grew, his level of play increased dramatically. By the season's halfway point, Scooter was batting cleanup and playing shortstop at a high level while Tim was the starting center fielder and batting third. Brian was tremendously proud of both boys' accomplishments. One thing Brian couldn't help but notice was the attention some of the kids' mothers had begun paying to him. For some reason his jokes actually made them laugh, and his efforts with the kids were constantly praised. A few mothers would bake something for the team, but always made sure he received a piece of whatever it was. Tim's friendship with Scooter and the time Brian spent with the boys naturally led to him spending more time with Gertrude. Brian thought of her as a smart friend with a great sense of humor, so he decided to ask her if she had noticed the increased interest from the mothers. "I may be way off base here, Minx, but I have to ask you a bit of a personal question," began Brian. Almost the AB cup was Gertrude's quick response. "What?" "I don't get it," admitted Brian. "When men preface a question to a lady by saying it's personal, aren't they usually going to ask her about her breast size?" "Well, yeah, that's usually true," agreed Brian with a chuckle. "In this case, I was going to ask if you've noticed some of the mothers treating me differently the last couple of weeks. Do you think they seem a little friendlier lately?" "Well, aren't you observant?" retorted Gertrude. "You really don't know what's going on, do you?" "I'd need more information regarding the what to which you refer before I could answer that question," mused Brian. "I understand the infield fly rule, and I know you never make the first or last out inning at third base. You aren't referring to those baseball axioms, are you?" "No, I was talking about the unwritten rule of never bunting or stealing bases when you have a huge lead," quipping Gertrude before becoming more serious. "If you've been paying attention, you know the friendliest team mothers are also single mothers. You're a great dad, a good-looking guy, and have a pretty decent job. That makes you a great catch in their book. What about the fact I'm a married man? Wouldn't they take that into consideration?" asked Brian. "They have," responded Scooter's mom. "That's why they haven't actually attempted to pursue you." "No one has tried that yet, have they?" "No one has, and it hasn't been a problem," replied Brian. "I'm married, so I obviously can't be a good catch for anyone. Brian, I don't like being the one to tell you this, but we're friends, so it falls on me. The mothers all know your wife is cheating on you. That's not all. The rumor is she's cut you off from intimacy. You don't sleep together, and it's a foregone conclusion you'll become available in the not-too-distant future. These women want to be ready for you as soon as you're free." Brian was stunned by Gertrude's revelation. How could so many people know about his personal situation? Who would possibly know about his private life or lack thereof? Then it hit him, Brenda must have mentioned their issues and someone had spread the word. "Are you referring to your wife or her partner?" asked Gertrude, trying to lighten the mood. "I have to say you don't seem all that surprised by the rumors. Did you already suspect Brenda was cheating?" "No, I never suspected," answered Brian. "You had no idea at all?" asked the disbelieving Gertrude. "I knew she was cheating. I just never suspected it until I caught her and Grant together. I went from having no clue to certain in a matter of seconds. I completely skipped being suspicious." "That revelation creates more questions than it answers," stated his confused friend. "You saw them together and yet you're still married and you're not in prison. You're not a swinger or someone who likes to watch, are you?" "I'm not," assured Brian. "I decided to adjust my priorities. Spending quality time with Tim and not being a part-time dad became my main goal. Living with Brenda rather than divorcing her seemed like the best way to achieve that. I started working nights, which affected our relationship, and I built a separate apartment over my detached garage to have my own space. I told Brenda it was for sleeping during the day without being disturbed. She wasn't thrilled about the arrangement, but Grant kept her informed about every detail. She thinks her affair is a secret and wants to keep it that way. I haven't shared the truth with her and I won't be intimate with her for any reason. I went to the clinic and got tested for STDs. I'm clean and I plan to keep it that way. You're serious? Gertrude asked. How can she treat you like that? What a jerk that guy is. All the single moms think you'd be a great catch, Gertrude continued. I think you may have an inflated opinion of my desirability. I've never been the matinee idol type. I do have a good job, so that might make me look better to some of the more interested women, Brian offered. Are you kidding? Look how handsome you are. You have a wonderful smile, pointed out Gertrude. You're strong, kind, smart, and great with kids. If I weren't so plain-looking, I might have already shown some interest myself. I think I'd better shut up. Thanks for being a good enough friend to tell me what people are saying and thinking, replied Brian with a frown. I didn't realize everyone knew about my situation. It's pretty embarrassing. I can't keep my own wife happy. You're a good man who wants to be a good father to his son. You're strong enough to endure this so you can have a great relationship with Tim. Horace thinks you're pretty cool too, Gertrude said. Who asked Brian? You must be feeling better if you can tease me about Horace's name, observed Gertrude with a smile. You're a great friend. You've kept me from getting my head stuck too far up my butt. I just hope Tim doesn't find out that things are not going well at home, revealed Gertrude. Horace says Tim knows things aren't right at home. You pretty much avoid his mother, so he's bound to hear something when so many people know about it. You know what worries me, added Gertrude. Horace is sweet on Heather Grant. How awkward is that for him and for me? She's a nice girl. She's got no idea what her father is like. I'm just glad Tim isn't the one interested in Heather, stated Brian. What a mess that would be. I should be for small favors. Horace tells me Tim is pretty interested in Holly Ingram, but that shouldn't surprise you much. She comes to every game and cheers for every move he makes, said a smiling Gertrude. Yes, I've noticed her hanging around. She seems like a nice girl. I knew her dad and uncles in school. They're a good family, recalled Brian. 2 nights later, Tim's team was playing in the first round of the district championships. Brian realized as game time drew closer that he was probably more nervous than Tim. It didn't help that the usual 3 single mothers were determined to get his attention. Norma Wilson wore a top that exposed a good portion of her figure, and frequently leaned over in front of Brian, finding reasons to pick something up. Brandy Dorn kept her figure covered but wore a very tight sweater, accentuating her appearance. She constantly asked Brian questions about the team and the players. Jillian Patterson was less subtle. For some reason, she stood close enough to Brian that her side frequently brushed against him. Gertrude gave him a knowing smirk as she handed him a soda and a hot dog before returning to her seat on the first base side of the diamond. Brian noticed that all 3 women found reasons to leave his vicinity simultaneously. He thought it was odd until he heard a familiar voice behind him. I thought I'd join my husband this afternoon to watch my son play. I didn't realize I'd have to wade through so many admirers to reach him, observed Brenda more loudly than necessary. What's going on? The game hasn't started yet, but Tim looked pretty good in batting practice, replied Brian, trying to deflect the question. Nice try, but why were those women hanging around you like that? It's a good thing you aren't allergic to silicone, Brenda said. If you're asking me to explain the workings of the female mind, you're out of luck. I have no idea, admitted Brian. I'm even surprised you're here. My son is playing in an important game. I'm here to support him, obviously. Other mothers are here too, but apparently some of them are not just here for their kids, Brenda observed. How did you get away from your obligations today? Brian asked. Brenda glanced at her husband when he mentioned her obligations. She briefly wondered if he was implying something, but dismissed the thought quickly. If he had any suspicions, he would have been much angrier and far more confrontational. One thing she knew about Brian was he would never accept her cheating quietly. If he knew, he'd let her know in a very obvious way. I made time because this game is important for Tim, which makes it important for me. I've hardly seen you since you went on.